I awoke just before dawn, in that hour when the world is still swaddled in the last remnants of night, and all things seem paused, as if the universe itself is holding its breath. The air was heavy with silence, not an ordinary silence, but one so thick and sacred that even the walls of my small room seemed to lean inward, listening. I lay there for a while, wrapped in wool and thoughts, watching the ceiling fade from deep charcoal to a shade just lighter than shadow. Something inside me stirred, something restless, something old. It wasn't hunger, nor weariness, but a gentle ache, like a memory rising from a place deeper than memory. Eventually, I rose and pulled aside the curtain. Frost clung to the glass in feathery patterns, crystalline veins spreading across the pane like sacred geometry drawn by invisible hands. The window pane, touched by the breath of winter, mirrored the breath on my lips. I exhaled slowly, fogging the glass. In that moment, I realized I, too, had become like that frost, still, unmoving, beautiful perhaps in my symmetry, but rigid, clinging, frozen. I touched the glass and felt the chill enter my fingertips like a quiet warning. My breath, my thoughts, my body, all responded to the cold, as if my own being were echoing the season outside. I draped myself in a heavy cloak and stepped barefoot into the cold, wanting to feel the truth of the world without barriers. The moment I opened the door, the winter air rushed in like a forgotten truth, clean and sharp, cutting through the fog of my sleep. My skin tingled. My breath smoked. I stepped into a world transformed overnight by snow. Everything, rooftops, trees, pathways, had been wrapped in a layer of white so pristine it seemed almost unreal, as if the entire earth had been reborn in silence. The sky above was pale and infinite, still streaked with the last stars of night. A faint gold rim touched the edge of the horizon, hinting at the sun's approach, but it offered no warmth yet. The trees stood tall and still, their naked branches laced with frost, each twig encased in delicate ice, like fingers clutched in prayer. Beneath my feet, the snow crunched softly, the sound echoing in the still air like a whispered secret. I walked slowly, reverently, as though I were stepping not on earth but on a sacred page of the divine. I wandered without aim, drawn only by the pull of that inner stirring. I looked around and saw how the snow had hidden every scar of the earth, every uneven step, every broken stone, every wound of the land. It had blanketed the world in a kind of holy forgetting. I realized I had done the same with myself. I had cloaked the pain I carried, hidden it beneath layers of words, of rituals, of reputation. In guiding others toward truth, had I forgotten to offer that same truth to myself? The image of myself I held, Rumi, the mystic, the poet, the teacher, was that not just another cloak? Another layer of snow that had buried the deeper, nameless me? My steps took me to the edge of a frozen stream, its surface sealed in glass, but beneath, I could hear the faint murmur of water still moving, alive, unseen. I sat there, cross-legged on a stone, and listened to it. It sang to me, not with words, but with movement. That stream was truth. It had not stopped flowing, even though the world above believed it still. It whispered, to know the beloved, you must melt. You must shed the shell you wear. You must stop pretending to be frozen. A memory surfaced then, of myself as a child, running barefoot in spring, arms outstretched like wings, laughing without knowing why. I remembered the feeling of being utterly dissolved into the moment, of being not a boy but joy itself. That memory hurt. Not because it was gone, but because I had built walls against it. I had become snow that refused to melt, fearing what I might lose if I did. But standing here now, amidst the frozen hush, I realized that I had nothing to lose, only the illusion of self to surrender. I scooped a handful of snow and held it in my palm. At first it stung, biting into the lines of my skin, but then slowly, gently, it began to melt. I watched it bead into water, drip by drip, soaking into my hand and running down my wrist. I did not try to stop it. I watched its transformation, fascinated, reverent. The snow had not died, it had simply become something else, fluid, free, able to move and nourish. Why then do we fear the same dissolution in ourselves? Why do we cling to shape, to name, to ego, when our deepest nature is to flow? I whispered aloud to the snow, as if it could hear me, teach me how to melt. Teach me how to let go of myself. The wind stirred softly then, curling around my shoulders like a whisper from the unseen. I felt something loosen in my chest, something ancient and hard, a knot that had been there for years. And in its place came a silence so deep it was like being cradled in the palms of the divine. As the first light of the sun broke across the snow-laden field, it struck the world with gold and fire. The snow began to shimmer. The icicles blinked like eyes awakening. And I knew, in that perfect moment, that the path ahead was not to build, but to melt, not to become more, but less. To strip away, to soften, to flow. The journey was not outward, but inward, and inward still, until I reached the still center where all boundaries dissolve. Until the self I knew was washed away, and only love remained. The sun continued its slow ascent, its light gently stretching across the expanse of snow-covered ground like golden threads weaving the world back into motion. I lingered beside the stream far longer than I had intended, mesmerized by the patient artistry of nature. The frozen brook was no longer still, it had become a sacred theater of transformation. Droplets hung on the tips of icicles like unanswered prayers, trembling in the soft light before they surrendered. Some let go quickly, falling with a tiny sound that barely touched the ear. Others clung longer, suspended in an intimate dance with gravity, unsure whether to remain or release. And watching them, I felt as though I were witnessing something ancient and holy, a lesson that the snow, in its silent dying, was trying to teach me. There was something unbearably honest in that moment of melting, a kind of divine vulnerability. I saw how the snow didn't resist the touch of the sun, how the ice did not cry out in protest as it disappeared into the stream. It simply gave itself over, with complete trust, to change. It allowed warmth to undo it. It accepted the end of its form so that it could return to its essence, water. And that, I realized, is all I had ever truly been. Not this name others called me. Not this reputation. Not this body, these titles, this voice. Just water in different shapes. Spirit in temporary skin. And yet, I had resisted. I had clung to the walls of identity I had built, afraid that if I melted, if I surrendered, there would be nothing left. But now, in the presence of this stream and its slow unraveling of ice, I felt that fear begin to lose its grip. I understood, not with my mind, but with something deeper, older, that the only thing that needed to disappear was the illusion. The self I defended so fiercely was not real. It was a costume made of thought, stitched from praise and judgment, stitched from fear of being forgotten. Beneath it, beneath all the roles I had played, poet, teacher, mystic, there was something simpler, purer, the quiet flow of being. I dipped my hand again into the stream, allowing the water to run between my fingers, cold and alive. I watched it drip from my knuckles back into the current, rejoining what it had never truly left. In that moment, I no longer felt apart from it. The boundary between skin and stream vanished. I was the water. I was the ice. I was the sunlight that turned one into the other. And in that brief flicker of unity, I tasted the freedom that comes when we no longer need to be anything at all, when we stop trying to hold ourselves together and allow ourselves to dissolve. Time became soft and shapeless. I cannot say how long I sat there, only that the sun had climbed higher in the sky, and the shadows of the trees had shortened, stretching beneath them like roots of light. The snow on the branches began to fall in delicate showers, cascading like petals from some great invisible blossom. Each flake melted upon touching the earth, feeding the soil, nourishing the unseen life waiting below the surface. And I thought, the snow does not mourn its falling. It does not grieve that it cannot remain. It trusts in its purpose. It disappears, not into death, but into renewal. That, too, became my prayer, not to remain as I was, but to disappear into what I could become. Not to be permanent, but to be purposeful. To serve not with the solidity of stone, but with the humility of water. To move, to nourish, to reflect the sky without trying to own it. I looked up, and far beyond the trees, I saw a hawk circling against the blue, riding the thermals in effortless spirals. He did not flap, did not fight. He simply opened himself to the invisible forces lifting him higher. I envied that grace. I whispered to the wind, "Teach me to soar like that," by surrendering. As I stood again, my body reluctant to leave the warmth of stillness, I realized something within me had already begun to thaw. It was not a grand awakening, no lightning of revelation, just a soft yielding, the way frost yields to dawn. I began walking once more, each step softer than the last, as if the snow beneath me welcomed the weight I no longer fought to carry. The landscape hadn't changed, yet I saw it differently. The trees no longer seemed still, they breathed. The rocks no longer seemed hard, they listened. The wind wasn't cold, it was full of messages. I touched the bark of a tree as I passed it, rough and cold beneath my fingers, and I thought of how even the tallest tree must one day fall and return to the earth that once cradled it. All things melt. All things change. And in that change, nothing is truly lost. Just as the snow becomes water, and the water becomes cloud, and the cloud becomes rain, so, too, will I. So, too, must I. The path ahead was long and winding, disappearing into a forest whose trees stood shoulder to shoulder like wise old friends. I did not know where it led, but for once, I did not care. I did not need to know. I would follow, not with ambition, not with longing, but with openness. Like the snow on the high peaks, I would melt slowly, tenderly, without resistance, until I could finally flow without form, without name, only presence, only being. I would wash myself of myself, not as an act of loss, but as an act of return. Return to the river. Return to the source. Return to the beloved, whose hands have always shaped my journey, drop by drop, without end. I stayed by the fire long into the evening, my body hunched close to the warmth, not merely for the heat it gave, but for the understanding it seemed to whisper into the hollows of my bones. The flames danced as though they were not made of wood and air, but of memory and revelation. Every flicker seemed to illuminate a corner of myself I had forgotten, or perhaps never truly known. I watched them move, wild, graceful, alive, and I felt as though I were sitting not in a room of stone and timber, but in the presence of a great teacher, one that spoke in crackles and sparks, in light and shadows. The fire didn't ask questions. It didn't argue. It didn't worry whether it was doing enough. It simply was, and in that being, it transformed everything around it. How long I remained there, I could not say. Time softened into something dreamlike, something circular. The world outside had dissolved into silence and darkness, and I, too, was dissolving. I felt my thoughts begin to thin, like mist rising from a lake at dawn. I was not thinking in words anymore, but in sensations, in movements of breath and soul. There was a moment, so subtle I almost missed it, when I ceased to feel separate from the fire. My body was still curled near it, my eyes still open and watching, but the boundary between where I ended and it began grew unclear. I felt heat not only on my skin but inside my chest, inside my ribs, as though a small flame had been lit within me, echoing the one I watched. The warmth seeped deep, down into those places within me I had long sealed off. Old sorrows, longings I never named, disappointments I never grieved, they began to stir in that heat, loosened by its touch. The fire called them forth, not to shame me, not to judge, but to invite them to rise and be transformed. I thought of the years I had spent trying to be someone, trying to craft a self that others could admire. Even my search for God, for truth, for meaning, had I not, at times, clung to it like a possession. I wanted to be devout, to be wise, to be seen as someone who had arrived. But now I understood, the moment you believe you have arrived is the moment you step away from the path. What the fire showed me, wordlessly, patiently, was that no self can carry you to the beloved. No name, no title, no achievement can pass through the final veil. Only surrender can. Only the part of you that is willing to burn, to be unmade, to become light itself. The fire held nothing back, gave everything, asked for nothing in return but presence. And in that giving, it grew more beautiful, more alive. I saw how this, too, must be my way, to burn not in anger, not in despair, but in love. To offer myself, my thoughts, my fears, my vanities, as kindling for something greater. The fire began to settle then, its flames no longer leaping, but curling gently like petals in retreat. Glowing coals pulsed like embers of a distant star, and the air filled with a quiet, sacred hush. I leaned back slightly, my spine against the wall, and listened. There was a hum beneath the silence, the sound of wood becoming ash, of energy returning to the unseen. And I thought of how we, too, return, not through decay, but through giving. Not through holding on, but through letting go. What if death was not the end but the final, truest act of love? What if it was the body's way of melting, of burning, of being washed free of all its disguises? I looked again at the embers, and in them I saw my many lives, each one a shape I had taken, a form I had worn. The young boy who once feared the dark. The student who questioned every silence. The man who thought poetry could hold eternity in words. The teacher who longed to awaken others, yet forgot sometimes to awaken himself. All of them had brought me here. And yet none of them could go with me beyond this moment. I had to release them. I had to thank them, and then let them burn. Tears came then, not from pain, but from release. They traced warm paths down my cheeks, quiet and grateful. I did not wipe them away. I let them fall, let them drop into the silence the way a leaf falls into a river, becoming part of the current. And in that surrender, I felt the flame within me grow stronger, not destructive, but radiant. Not wild, but steady. It filled my chest, spread through my limbs, warmed even the coldest corners of my spirit. I was not being consumed. I was being revealed. The fire within and the fire without became mirrors of one another, reflections of the same light. I understood, then, that transformation does not come from force, it comes from intimacy. From becoming so intimate with the truth of who you are that you no longer need to protect yourself. You no longer need to guard your boundaries, your image, your past. You simply allow yourself to be undone. Not by the world, but by love. When I finally stood, the fire was a bed of glowing coals, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. I bowed before it, not in ritual, but in reverence. I whispered my thanks, not with words, but with the breath of my being. I opened the door and stepped out into the night. The cold air met me like an old friend. It no longer bit into my skin, it kissed me awake. The stars above were bright, scattered like sparks from the fire itself, and I felt myself standing not in the world, but within it, no longer separate, no longer afraid. I walked barefoot into the snow, and though the chill was sharp, it did not startle me. I had been baptized in flame. I had learned what it meant to burn without smoke, to melt without drowning. With every step, I felt lighter, as though something inside me had been washed clean, burned away, left behind. I did not know what would come next. I did not need to know. I had finally begun to understand that the fire's lesson was not about destruction, but about illumination. About offering oneself completely. And I whispered to the night, let me be that light. Let me burn, let me melt, let me vanish, so that only love remains. The light continued to grow across the stream like a gentle tide of gold, creeping along the banks, creeping into the spaces where shadow had lived just moments before. I stayed there long after the traveler disappeared into the arms of the forest. His footprints, like mine, began to blur beneath the faint stirrings of wind. The silence returned, not empty but deeper now, filled with what had been spoken and unspoken between two souls that had shared something more than words. The snowflakes began to fall again, slowly, lazily, without urgency, like thoughts drifting down from the divine. I tilted my head back and let them touch my face. Cold, soft, vanishing on contact. Each one a reminder that nothing, no pain, no joy, no name we carry, lasts. And still, the sky sends us these fragile messengers, whispering, disappear and become. The melting had begun in him, yes, but also in me. For all my words, for all the moments I have spent speaking of the soul, the beloved, of fire and surrender and love, too, have walls. I, too, carry frozen chambers in my heart. Parts of me that have clung to the role I thought I had to play, the wise one, the poet, the teacher who must always have an answer. Yet today, beside that stream, I had no answers. Only presence. Only witness. And in that space of not knowing, of simply being, I felt something inside me loosen, something that had been trying to break free not for days, but for years. There is a sweetness in being nothing, I thought. Not in the sense of worthlessness, but in the sense of vastness. In not needing to prove anything, to wear anything, to protect anything. To melt is to become less, and in becoming less, you become more open, more still, more free. I reached down and touched the stream again, letting the water slip between my fingers, its cold not as biting as before. Perhaps I had changed. Or perhaps I had simply remembered how to feel again. Above me, a bird sang. Just one. A thin, reedy note that trembled in the clear air. It did not sing for attention. It did not sing to be remembered. It sang because the morning was here, and its heart had something to offer. I closed my eyes and listened, allowing the song to enter me like breath, like a thread weaving itself through the quiet fabric of my soul. The stream, the snow, the fire, the stranger, the bird, everything around me was part of one vast unfolding, and I was not separate from it. I was not standing outside the story. I was the story. I was the ice and the melting, the sorrow and the song. I stood then, slowly, carefully, feeling my joints stiff from stillness but my spirit oddly light. The forest was silent again except for the trickle of the stream and the fading song of the bird. I walked without direction, letting my feet guide me, letting the trees decide where I should go. My steps were softer now, not because the snow was deeper, but because I no longer needed to rush. There was nothing to reach, nowhere to arrive. Each moment was enough. Each breath was a step. As I moved through the woods, I came upon a clearing I hadn't noticed before. It was wide and open, ringed with old, tall trees that arched like guardians around it. In the center stood a fallen log, half covered in moss, half covered in snow, like a memory both living and forgotten. I sat upon it, not to think, but to be. And there, in that circle of trees and sky, I finally allowed myself to weep, not from sadness, but from awe. From the overwhelming grace of being allowed to witness life as it is. To see how even pain, even loss, is a kind of thawing. A way for the soul to crack open and let light inside. Tears rolled down my face and fell into the snow. I watched them disappear, vanish into the ground like blessings, like confessions. And I realized that the act of melting is not only spiritual, it is deeply human. It is what we were made for. To come into this world rigid with fear and desire, only to soften slowly into the shape of love. And just as the stream does not seek to be seen, and the fire does not demand to be thanked, we too must learn to give ourselves over, to vanish beautifully, purposefully, humbly. I remembered something my father once told me when I was a boy, long before I had written my first poem, long before I had understood silence. He said, "You are not here to leave a mark. You are here to leave no trace at all, and in that way, touch everything." I didn't understand it then. I do now. To wash myself of myself is not to abandon who I am, but to return to who I've always been beneath the masks, nameless, fluid, true. The wind shifted, and with it came a scent, damp bark, fresh snow, something green and waiting. Spring was still far off, but its promise lingered in the air like a secret too good to keep. Life was already preparing to rise again, quietly, beneath the surface. And I knew that the same was happening within me. Not in grand transformations, but in soft, invisible ones. The kind of change that begins not in action, but in stillness. Not in speaking, but in listening. The kind of change that water teaches us, patient, persistent, inevitable. I sat in that clearing until the sky turned blue again, until the last tears dried on my face, until the shadows of the trees had shifted their weight across the snow. And when I rose, I left behind no trace of my presence, no footprint in the untouched white. I stepped into the forest again not as a man returning from a lesson, but as one who had become part of the learning itself. My heart beat slower, but with more truth. My breath moved in and out like the stream itself, fluid, faithful, free. As I walked back toward the house, I whispered aloud, not to myself, but to the world, to the one who watches all things unfold. Let me melt in every moment. Let me vanish like snow touched by sun. Let me carry nothing of myself, so I may carry everything of you. The days unfolded like slow, sacred breath, each one not a mere repetition but a new hymn whispered by the earth itself. Morning arrived not in haste, but in a gentle unveiling, as if the world too had learned the art of patient surrender. I awoke with no urgent desires, no pressing questions. Instead, I found myself cradled in the soft silence between dreams and daylight. The cold kissed my skin lightly, and the air was thick with the subtle scent of frost and pine, as if the very breath of the forest was weaving itself around me. I wrapped my cloak around my shoulders, feeling the weight of its fabric grounding me, and stepped out into the quiet dawn. The path before me curved softly along the edge of the hill, rimmed with the delicate skeletons of grasses and flowers that had long since bowed beneath the winter's touch. Each footfall pressed into the snow, imprinting a fleeting mark upon the earth, a mark that would soon fade, erased by wind and time. There was a deep lesson in this simple truth: to leave behind without clinging, to touch without grasping, to be present without possession. I walked slowly, allowing my senses to open to the stillness that surrounded me, to the delicate whisper of branches, the distant murmur of hidden streams, the faint heartbeat of the earth beneath frozen soil. Drawn by an unspoken knowing, I found myself moving toward the old orchard, a place I had loved and neglected in equal measure. The trees stood naked now, their limbs gnarled and bare against the pale sky, like ancient sentinels guarding secrets only winter could coax from their silent roots. The orchard, once bursting with blossoms and promise, was now a testament to the cycles of surrender, the necessary shedding of leaves and petals to prepare for renewal. There was no sorrow in their bareness, only quiet dignity. The trees did not cling to their spring glory, they rested in what was, knowing that bloom would return in its own time. I wandered beneath their skeletal boughs, letting my fingers brush rough bark, feeling the slow, steady pulse of life beneath the surface. How often do we resist our own seasons of bareness? How fiercely we cling to our masks, our ambitions, our carefully woven identities, fearing that to let go is to vanish. Yet here was the truth: to yield is not to perish, but to prepare. To melt is not to be lost, but to be renewed. At the heart of the orchard stood an ancient well, its stones weathered and moss-clad, the rope frayed from countless years of use. I had not approached it for many seasons, yet something urged me now. I knelt by its edge and peered into the darkness, a deep, silent pool where light could not reach. There was no reflection to see, only a mystery that stretched beyond sight. In that stillness, I felt the echo of my own hidden depths, those parts of me I had locked away, afraid to face, fearful of their cold and shadow. I sat beside the well, allowing the silence to settle over me like a shroud. No words came, only the quiet rhythms of breath and heartbeat, the gentle sigh of wind threading through the trees. In that emptiness, a sudden realization blossomed. Even in my surrender, I had clung to an idea, the idea of being the one who surrendered well, the one who had reached the summit of letting go. It was a subtle pride, a hidden desire to be seen as transformed. And that, too, was a form of holding on. The orchard seemed to breathe around me, the bare branches swaying ever so slightly, as if to offer a blessing or a challenge. "Let even that go," it whispered without words. "Let go of the need to be known, to be praised, to be anything at all." I closed my eyes, and within the darkness behind my lids, I felt the walls I had built begin to crumble. Slowly, tenderly, I released the last threads of ego, the last shreds of self I had clung to in fear of falling apart. In that space of utter stillness, a presence filled me, not a thought or feeling, but a deep, vast awareness. It was not joy nor peace, but something older and wider, the pure essence of being. It moved through me like a river unblocked, washing away the sediment of years and illusions, leaving behind the clear water of truth. When I opened my eyes, the orchard no longer appeared as a place outside of me, but as a mirror of my own journey. The barren limbs were my own stripped defenses, the patient silence, my newfound trust. I was no longer merely passing through this world, I was becoming it, and it was becoming me. Rising from the well, I moved slowly back toward the path, each step a meditation on surrender. The snow crunched softly beneath my feet, the cold air crisp and invigorating. I felt lighter, not because I had gained something, but because I had let go of everything that weighed me down. There was no hurry to reach a destination. The journey itself was the destination. The silence itself was the song. That evening, as dusk settled over the land like a velvet shawl, I lit a single candle. Its flame flickered softly in the quiet room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. I watched the wax melt, drop by drop, pooling at the base, surrendering its form to the slow work of illumination. The candle did not fight its melting. It did not cling to its shape. It gave itself wholly and willingly, becoming light in the darkness. I thought then, with a tenderness I had not known before, so must I be. To wash myself of myself is not an act of loss but an act of love, a willing melting, a gentle burning, a sacred vanishing that allows light to pass through. No longer seeking to shine for others, but simply to burn. No longer clinging to identity, but opening to the infinite. No longer resisting the melting, but welcoming it as the purest path to union. And so I sat with the candle, quiet and open, melting in the darkness, not disappearing, but becoming. Becoming nothing and everything all at once. Becoming the stream, the fire, the orchard, the well, and the light itself. Becoming love, without form, without boundary, without end. The morning unfolded with the delicacy of a whispered prayer, the light filtering through the mist like a soft veil drawn gently across the face of the earth. The sky was a tapestry woven with hues of silver and pale blue, the sun yet a shy visitor behind clouds heavy with the promise of rain. I rose slowly, my body still tender from the quiet unraveling that had begun days before, my breath steady and calm, as if learning again the sacred rhythm of surrender. The air outside was cool and moist, filled with the scent of damp earth, moss, and the faint trace of wildflowers waiting patiently beneath the soil. I wrapped my cloak tightly about me, feeling its familiar weight settle like a quiet anchor, and stepped beyond the door into a world softened by shadow and silence. The path ahead was carpeted with fallen leaves, their edges curled and darkened by the passing season. Each footfall pressed gently into the soil beneath, leaving behind an imprint destined to vanish beneath the coming rain. I walked without haste, my senses opening to the subtle symphony of the forest, the gentle rustle of branches, the faint murmur of distant streams, the breath of the wind weaving through ancient trees. Their bark was rough and cracked beneath my fingertips, a testament to years of weathering storms and seasons, standing tall and unwavering. I marveled at their quiet strength, how they could endure losing their leaves, shedding what was no longer needed, and still remain rooted, patient, and alive. As I ventured deeper, a gentle rain began to fall, almost imperceptibly at first, a soft sprinkle of blessings from the sky. The droplets touched my skin like cool caresses, soaking into my cloak and mingling with the earthy scents around me. The rain was not an interruption but an embrace, a cleansing melody inviting me to release the tight hold I kept on myself. With each drop, I felt layers of tension, pride, and fear dissolve, melting into the earth, carried away by the rhythm of the falling water. I found a clearing where the ground was rich and dark, a sacred circle surrounded by towering pines whose needles whispered ancient songs. I sat upon the damp earth, feeling the coolness seep through my robes, anchoring me to the present moment. The rain's steady song surrounded me, a hymn without words, yet filled with profound meaning. In its gentle persistence, I felt my own defenses soften, walls crumbling like ancient ruins yielding to time and tenderness. There, in the sacred space between earth and sky, I let myself weep. Not from sorrow, but from a deep wellspring of release, a cleansing that mingled with the rain, indistinguishable from the tears that traced warm paths down my cheeks. I surrendered to the flow, allowing the melting of my inner ice to continue, trusting that in this dissolution lay the birth of something new and alive. The rain did not rush me, it did not demand more than my presence. It was patient, nurturing the slow unraveling of self with compassion and grace. In that moment, I realized how often we resist the rains of our souls, the grief that threatens to break us, the doubts that erode our certainties, the vulnerability that leaves us exposed. Yet those very rains are the instruments of transformation, the waters that cleanse and renew. To resist is to cling to illusion, to surrender is to embrace the path of becoming. As the rain softened into a mist, the forest shimmered with a delicate radiance, droplets clinging to leaves and needles, sparkling like scattered stars catching the light of a waking sun. The air was fragrant with the scent of life preparing to bloom beneath the surface, a promise whispered in the language of earth and water. Rising from the ground, I felt a lightness in my spirit, a weight lifted, a cleansing completed. My steps homeward were slow and reverent, each one a prayer of gratitude for the gift of surrender. Arriving at the lodge, the sun broke fully through the clouds, casting golden beams that warmed the stones of the hearth and chased away the lingering shadows. Standing before the cold hearth, I felt the fire within me kindle anew, steady, warm, and radiant, fueled by the rains of release and the fertile soil of acceptance. The journey inward had led me to a deeper understanding. To be like melting snow is to yield not only to softening but also to the purifying rains that follow, to trust the cycles of loss and renewal, to embrace the sacred dance of dissolution and rebirth. And so, with the warmth of dawn filling my chest, I whispered a prayer carried on the gentle breeze. Let me be both the melting and the washing, the surrender and the renewal. Let me dissolve my old self again and again, until all that remains is the boundless love that moves through all things. In this surrender, I found freedom, not as absence, but as presence, pure and unbounded, flowing endlessly like the rain upon the earth. The afternoon stretched out before me like a vast, uncharted canvas, inviting the brushstrokes of presence and awareness with every breath I took. The rain had ceased its gentle hymn, and in its place, the sun emerged, soft and deliberate, filtering through the interlaced branches above, casting a kaleidoscope of light and shadow onto the mossy floor. Each beam danced and shimmered like a promise, awakening the forest in hues of gold and emerald. I wandered without purpose, allowing my feet to carry me where they would, unburdened by expectation, guided only by the tender pulse that had begun to quicken within me. This pulse was subtle, like the slow melting of snow under the persistent warmth of spring, a quiet alchemy transforming cold hardness into fluid grace. Deeper into the woods, I discovered a brook, its waters crystal clear and lively, weaving their way over smooth, time-worn stones. The brook sang its eternal song, a gentle murmur that resonated with the silent chambers of my heart. I settled beside it, letting the cool water envelop my fingertips, a refreshing balm to the residual heat of lingering restlessness within me. Observing the water's dance, I was struck by its effortless surrender to the terrain. It moved without resistance, curving gracefully around obstacles, not battling the stones or banks but embracing each twist and turn as part of its journey. The brook taught me the art of yielding, not as weakness, but as a profound strength born of trust and adaptability. It melted into the contours of the earth without hesitation, becoming part of the landscape itself. I reflected on the times I had tried to hold myself rigid and defined, clinging to identities and stories that seemed to anchor me but in truth only confined me. The self I had so fiercely protected was often a prison, sculpted by fear and the illusion of control. Yet here, beside the flowing brook, I glimpsed freedom, not in resistance, but in letting go. To wash myself of myself was not an act of annihilation but a sacred shedding of layers, of expectations, attachments, and the masks worn to hide vulnerability. Like the water, I needed to become fluid, light enough to be carried on the current of love and grace alone. The path beside the brook opened into a small clearing where wildflowers had begun their delicate emergence. Their colors were soft but vibrant, petals unfolding like gentle invitations to the sun. They grew without worry or haste, unburdened by the past or anxious about the future. They trusted the rhythm of life, the cycle of blooming and withering, of surrender and renewal. Kneeling among them, I placed my hands in the warm earth and felt its steady heartbeat beneath my skin. The moment was a quiet lesson in presence, the courage to simply be here, now, open and undefended. The wildflowers did not struggle to become anything else. They were fully themselves in their fleeting beauty, and that was enough. As the sun began its descent, painting the heavens with hues of amber, rose, and lavender, a gentle stirring arose within my chest, a subtle, insistent call from the depths of my being. Closing my eyes, I inhaled deeply, allowing the moment to enfold me completely. In the silence beyond thought, beyond words, I touched the edge of a vast and boundless mystery, the space where the self dissolves, where love flows unbounded, free from condition or constraint. When I opened my eyes, the world shimmered anew, bathed in the golden light of acceptance and grace. Rising slowly, I carried within me a quiet knowing. To be like melting snow is to embrace the impermanence of all forms, to surrender to the eternal dance of transformation with open arms and an open heart. It is to welcome uncertainty and change not as threats, but as sacred invitations to shed old skins and blossom into new life. Like winter's last frost yielding to spring's gentle kiss, the self must soften and dissolve, making way for the endless renewal of the soul. Walking back through the forest beneath the deepening twilight, each step felt lighter than the one before, as though I were being carried by the very breath of the earth. The cool evening air caressed my face, and the first stars began to twinkle faintly in the indigo sky, ancient and steadfast. I lifted my voice in a whispered prayer to the night, a vow to myself and to the divine. Let me melt completely, let me flow like water, open like flowers, and surrender like snow touched by sun, so that I may carry nothing but the pure and radiant light of love within me. The words faded into the vastness, carried away on the wind, becoming part of the eternal dance of vanishing and becoming, loss and gain, melting and rebirth. The night wrapped itself around me like a vast, velvety cloak, thick and profound, yet inviting, as if the darkness itself held the breath of creation. I stepped outside into this quiet cathedral beneath the stars, their ancient light shimmering like scattered jewels strewn across the endless expanse. Each star seemed to pulse with stories older than time, whispering secrets from realms beyond human reach. The cool air settled softly on my skin, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and far-off blossoms that had yet to open. In that sacred stillness, I felt the immense weight of the cosmos pressing gently upon me, not as a burden, but as a tender embrace, inviting me to dissolve, to surrender deeper than ever before. The remnants of the self that still clung within me, the fragile ice of ego and identity, began to tremble at the edges, touched by the quiet call to melt. I thought of the snow I had known, once hard and crystalline, sparkling sharply in the cold light of winter mornings. Yet, under the patient warmth of the sun, it softens, losing its form and rigidity, flowing freely as water that finds its way into streams and rivers, joining the endless cycle of life. This was no destruction, no annihilation, it was transformation and return. To be like melting snow is to wash oneself of all separation, to surrender the illusion of control and permanence, and to become part of the great flow of existence itself. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, inviting that flow into the core of my being. The edges between myself and the night blurred. I was no longer simply a man standing beneath stars. I was the stars themselves, the space between, the infinite breath that animates all things. In this sacred surrender, I encountered a paradox so profound that it shook me to my very soul, that in losing the self, I gained everything. The ego, The fragile fortress built of fears, desires, and stories began to dissolve like morning frost under the relentless kiss of dawn's first light. Beneath it lay a vast ocean of love and presence, boundless and timeless, without beginning or end. The weight of my names, my roles, my memories began to lift, freeing me to become the pure, simple truth of existence itself, a wave returning to the ocean, a flame merging with the wind. Around me, the night hummed with a silent song, a music beyond words or melody. It was the language of stars, the breath of the earth, the heartbeat of the universe itself. I melted into that song, no longer grasping or striving, only surrendering to being. The humility of this letting go was profound, a holy vanishing where the self was no longer a fortress to defend but a river to flow with, a flame to be carried by the wind. In that moment, all resistance ceased. I was not losing myself, I was becoming vast, free, and unbound. Memories arose like gentle waves on the shore, not as burdens, but as whispers of a journey traveled. Faces of loved ones, moments bathed in joy and shadow, the pain and triumph that had shaped me, they flowed together in a seamless tapestry, each thread vital, yet none grasped too tightly. I realized then that washing myself of myself meant embracing all that I was and had been without clinging, loving without possession, honoring without attachment. It was a release so complete that it transformed love itself into freedom. The stars above seemed to shine brighter as the night deepened, their light both fierce and tender, reflecting the laughter that rose within me, a laughter born of liberation and grace. The melting was not an end, but a sacred transformation. Like snow yielding to streams that nourish the earth, so too must the self dissolve to feed the eternal spring of the soul. With hands raised to the vast sky, open and receptive, I offered myself wholly to the boundless mystery, to the love that is both everything and nothing, the source and the silence. As the horizon blushed with the first hints of dawn, softening the darkness with promises of light and renewal, I stood at the threshold of night and day, fully melting into the eternal dance of becoming. The ancient rhythm of surrender and rebirth flowed through me like a sacred river, washing away all fear and resistance. With a heart opened wide, I whispered to the awakening light, "Let me be nothing, so that I may become everything. Let me melt completely, without fear, without resistance, flowing forever in the boundless river of love, endless and free." The words dissolved into the vastness, becoming part of the endless unfolding of vanishing and becoming, loss and gain, melting and rebirth. In that sacred moment, I was both lost and found, vanished and fully alive, one with the infinite, the eternal, the beloved. The dawn unfolded with a quiet majesty, stretching its tender fingers across the horizon, spilling light like liquid gold over the sleeping earth. I sat by the window, wrapped in the soft stillness that lingers between night and morning, feeling the fragile moment hold its breath before the world awoke in earnest. The sky wore a gentle blush, soft pinks bleeding into delicate lavenders, the clouds drifting like whispers across a vast, awakening canvas. In that delicate in-between space, I felt a stirring deep within me, a gentle unfolding born from the surrender I had been practicing, a sacred melting away of the hardened layers that once cloaked my soul. Like the snow that yields fully to the sun's warmth, I was dissolving, not vanishing into emptiness but sinking into a fertile new beginning, one rich with possibility and quiet grace. My mind traced the journey that had led me here, through rain that washed away the dust of illusion, nights steeped in starry silence where the vastness of the cosmos humbled me, and moments of tender surrender where I learned to release the tightly held fragments of self. Each step was a soft peeling away, a gentle unbinding of pride, fear, attachment, and the false divisions that separate us from the truth of who we are. Like snow melting slowly into the soil, the hardness inside me softened, and with it came a revelation. True strength is not found in holding tight, but in yielding fully. This path of letting go was not one of defeat, but of courage, the courage to surrender familiar identities and step into a boundless freedom beyond the ego's grasp. I reflected on the many ways I had resisted change, clinging desperately to forms, stories, and masks that once seemed essential to my survival. How often I had feared the dissolution of the self, mistaking melting for loss. Yet now I saw clearly that to be like melting snow is to embrace transformation with open arms, to trust the sacred cycles of birth, death, and rebirth that carry us through life's seasons. It is the washing away of all that confines us, all that separates us, until only love remains, pure and radiant, without beginning or end. This love is not owned. It is the ocean into which every river flows, the fire that burns away illusion, the quiet presence beneath every breath we take. Outside, the world began to stir. The distant song of birds heralded the new day, their melodies weaving through the rustling leaves and the gentle hum of awakening life. I stepped into the garden, feeling the cool earth firm beneath my feet, alive with the promise of renewal. Dew glistened on the petals of flowers still folded in sleep, their fragile beauty teaching me once more the sacred art of presence, how to open, to be vulnerable, and to surrender without resistance. Each step I took was an offering, a prayer woven from the fabric of gratitude and trust in the great unfolding. As the sun rose higher, casting warm light that filtered through the branches in shimmering patterns, a profound peace settled over me. It was not the restless peace that comes from avoidance or denial, but a deep, unshakable calm born of union, with myself, with the earth, with the vast mystery of existence. I was no longer separate from the world. I was woven into its very fabric, a single thread in the endless tapestry of life. The melting had brought me home, to a sacred place beyond identity, beyond ego, beyond the illusion of separateness. Here, in this space of openness, I could simply be, a fleeting wave upon the infinite ocean, a flicker of light in the endless night, a breath of love moving through time and space. I knelt among the wildflowers, feeling their tender petals brush against my hands, and offered a silent prayer to the morning. Let me melt completely. Let me be washed clean of all that is not love. Let me surrender every story, every fear, every barrier that divides, so that I may be born anew in the eternal flow of grace. As I whispered these words, I felt the final threads of resistance unravel, falling away like delicate icicles dripping from a thawing branch. I was no longer a man clinging to a fixed self, but a river flowing freely toward the ocean, a candle flame carried gently by the breeze, snow fully melted and risen as spring's sweet promise. In that surrender, I found the deepest truth. To wash oneself of oneself is not loss but liberation, not emptiness but fullness, not an end but the eternal beginning. It is the sacred dance of melting and becoming, the endless current of love that carries us home, beyond all form, beyond all fear, into the radiant heart of being itself. And as the day blossomed fully around me, I rose from the earth with a heart wide open, ready to walk this path anew, ever melting, ever flowing, ever becoming the love that moves through all things. The day ripened into a golden fullness, the sun pouring its light generously across every leaf, every blade of grass, every whispering breeze that stirred the garden's quiet corners. The warmth settled deeply into the earth, into the stone paths winding gently beneath my feet, and into my very bones, as if the entire world were breathing life and light into me. In this sacred moment of radiant clarity, I stood at the threshold of transformation, no longer bound by the hardened armor of the self I once wore so tightly, but stripped bare and yet profoundly whole. It was as though I had been melted down like snow, the cold rigidity dissolved, flowing freely into the vast river of existence. I was empty, yes, but emptied only to be filled with a presence so deep and so wide that it eclipsed all former notions of self and separateness. I thought once more of the snow, how it lies cold and white in the silence of winter, pure and unyielding, but under the touch of spring's gentle sun, it softens, yielding not with defeat but with grace, becoming water that feeds streams, rivers, and oceans. In this transformation, I recognized my own journey, a sacred letting go, a washing away of ego's false constructs and the fears that had shackled me to illusions of permanence and control. To wash oneself of oneself is not to vanish into nothingness, but to become fully present in the great unfolding mystery, to become part of the ceaseless, boundless flow that connects all things beyond time and form. This truth unfolded within me like a flower opening to the sun, revealing the heart of love hidden beneath layers of self-imposed separation. Around me, life was vibrant with song and movement. Birds flitted through branches, their melodies weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed to echo the pulse beating within my chest. Leaves danced in the gentle breeze, their rustling a soft susurration of ancient wisdom. I wandered slowly through the garden, each step a mindful offering, each breath a prayer of gratitude for this moment of awakening. The flowers, fragile yet fiercely alive, turned their faces toward the light, teaching me once again the grace of surrender, how to open fully without hesitation, to trust the process of growth and release. I paused beside a small stream that meandered through the garden, its waters sparkling and clear in the sunlight. Kneeling down, I cupped the cool liquid in my hands, feeling its effortless flow slip between my fingers. The water did not cling to any shape or form but moved with gentle determination, curving around stones, carving its path forward without resistance. Watching this, I felt the lesson of surrender settle deeper into my bones. To live like water, to relinquish control, to flow with the currents of life rather than fighting them. This was freedom, not a chaotic drifting, but a conscious yielding that carries one beyond fear and illusion into the heart of being. As the sun climbed higher, casting sharp, intricate shadows, I felt a wellspring of gratitude rise within me. Gratitude for the journey that had brought me here, the trials, the tears, the moments of quiet surrender that had gradually softened my spirit like the slow melting of snow into nourishing water. I understood, deeply and truly, that this path of melting and washing is not mine alone. It is the sacred journey of all beings, the universal dance of birth, death, and rebirth that weaves the fabric of existence. We are all connected by this flow, snowflakes dissolving into streams, rivers feeding oceans, stars born and dying in the endless sky. Within this vast web of life, I found the source of true liberation, the freedom to be wholly present, wholly alive, wholly surrendered to the ever-unfolding mystery. The garden seemed to breathe with me in harmonious rhythm, the petals quivering in the breeze, the ancient trees whispering their timeless secrets, the earth itself humming beneath my feet. Closing my eyes, I allowed myself to dissolve once more, not into despair or loss, but into the loving embrace of the cosmos. The boundaries of self blurred and faded. I became a thread in the infinite tapestry of life, a note in the eternal melody of love and being. In that sacred merging, I found peace beyond words, a deep, radiant calm that touched the very core of my existence. Opening my eyes to the brilliance of the day, I whispered into the light, "Let me continue to melt, to wash away the layers of self again and again, until only love remains, pure, boundless, and eternal." The prayer settled into the air, carried by the breeze and woven into the fabric of the world. With heart open wide and spirit renewed, I stepped forward into the light, a soul reborn, flowing endlessly in the sacred river of life, surrendering fully to the endless dance of melting and becoming.